All right, everybody, welcome to Crosstalk this week with Ole Miss. We have Neal McCready in from Ole Miss's rival site with us. And, just again, you're here at Death Valley Insider. I'm Jermaine Every, an analyst here at Death Valley Insider. You're home for LSU sports coverage on the rivals.com and Yahoo Sports Networks. You can check us out at deathvalleyinsider.com, on our YouTube page, LSU Tigers on Rivals, and on Twitter at LSU Rivals. I still call it Twitter. So, Neal, we got you in. So thankful to have you here to do the crosstalk with us this week because I reached out to Jefferson and I said, hey, do you have a contact for the Ole Miss guys so we can go ahead and set up crosstalk? He was like, yeah, you're gonna talk to Neal. And I looked it up and I was like, wait, Neal's the publisher. I'm like, man, cool. I finally get to talk to a publisher. I'm used to talking to someone else, not always talking to like the publisher. But I think last week or week before last, I talked to one of the guys that I believe it was Arkansas. I talked to their publisher. So I'm 2 for 2 talking to, well, 2 out of 4 talking to publishers, I guess I'll say.
Well, I'm glad to be here. I appreciate you having me very much.
Man, and another thing is he told me that you're a radio guy. He said this guy will probably have the best quality audio that we'll do all season.
Yeah, I'm a former radio guy. We've been doing a daily podcast for 10 years now.
Nice.
And then we do a lot of other podcast stuff. It's kind of taken off. MPW Digital, M as in Michael, P as in Paul, W as in William Digital. So check out a lot of our stuff. We'll have a big Ole Miss LSU preview later in the week. We'll have another preview show that's video, film breakdown. We'll look at the Tigers, look at what the Rebels did last week in Alabama, and all of that. So a lot of content. If you get a chance to check us out at MPW, we'd appreciate it.
Man, I just pulled it up, mpwdigital.com. This looks pretty cool. I love that header pick with the soccer player and everything, and then it looks like the lady in her chair. Is that it, or am I on the right side?
It's on YouTube. Go to on YouTube. It's just MPW Digital.
Gotcha. Okay, let me get to that way I can pull that up because I like to make sure if I don't do it now, I'm going to end up forgetting by the time we do this, and then the next time I remember is when I listen back to it. I'll be, oh crap, wait, that's what I was supposed to go to. Okay, got it. Subscribe, cool. Just wanted to make sure I do that before we kept going. So Neal, just besides MPW Digital, can you just plug yourself and tell everybody where they can find you, what you do, and how you came to be here at the Ole Miss and Rivals Network?
Yeah, it's kind of a long story. It's rebelgrove.com, part of the Rivals Network, as you mentioned. I'm the publisher. I've been here for, I guess my first season covering Ole Miss was 2008. Nice. Before that, I was in Mobile for about 10 years. I covered Auburn for 6 years. I covered the SEC as a whole for several years, covered a lot of LSU football and New Orleans Saints football when I was in Mobile. So got a little nervous about mainstream media, certainly got nervous about newspapers, didn't feel good about newspapers. I had a daily radio show in Mobile for 6 years on WNSP that came to an end, as sometimes radio things come to ends, and that came to an end, and it became obvious that it was kind of time to do something different, and moved to Oxford thinking we'd be here for 2 or 3 years, and ended up raising all 3 of our kids here. So it's been a good place to raise a family, and we've been here for a long time.
That's cool, man. It's always, and it's funny because people don't realize how much our kids dictate our lives. People who do not have kids, they don't realize like literally almost every waking moment of your day is impacted by a thought. Okay, how does this affect my kids? Yes. How does this affect everything else moving forward? Because trust me, I know I've been there. I've definitely made life-changing, life-altering decisions based on my kids.
Yeah, there's no axiom in life that's truer than you're only as happy as your most miserable child. And so your efforts to make your children happy and to be there for your kids they absolutely dictate your life. They certainly dictate mine. It sounds like they dictate yours too. And yeah. So it has been the best thing about this. When I made this move, I really didn't know it was such a drastic move from what I was doing with kind of mainstream traditional media to this, and I didn't anticipate that it would last very long, frankly. And for the first couple of years, I really missed the media that I was used to at the, in Birmingham and Mobile, and covering things in a more traditional manner. And then the podcast kind of took off, and
one thing led to the next.
Yeah, one thing led to the next, and then I discovered that I really liked A, being my own boss, and B, I discovered that I was a little more entrepreneurial than I thought I was, and I discovered, like a lot of people discover, that you know what, the only thing better than making this amount of money is making this amount of money plus that amount of money, and I'm motivated by lots of things, money included, but I've really enjoyed having freedom to try things, and we've tried some things that have failed, and we've tried some things that we thought would fail that did not fail, and so you learn a little bit. It's I tell my kids this all the time, especially when you're young. Don't be afraid to fail. Failure is not a bad thing as long as you learn from said failure. It's not a bad thing. So that's kind of shaped where we've gone as a site. Our site's different than most sites on the on the Rivals network. We're not we're really analytically driven, so we pay a lot of attention to analytics, and that kind of shapes what we do and what we don't focus on as much. So,
but it's good that you guys approach it differently, because taking a more analytical approach and giving those type of numbers and tidbits, and also not just throwing it out there, but the way you guys like to explain it, it's as if you're not taking your readers and your subscribers' knowledge for granted. You're actually trying to educate them on the information that you're presenting. And I really can appreciate something like that, because you don't want to give people the same old tired old thing, just rinse and repeat over and over and over. You want to give them something new and something fresh. So that's pretty interesting. But let's get right into it. This matchup coming up at 5:00 on Saturday this weekend, LSU and Ole Miss. Just looking at the Winsipedia, giving some series numbers. LSU leads the series 64-41. There's 4 ties in there. LSU won last year's game. It was a really, really good game last year, I'll say. But just looking at these two teams coming in, and I peeked at ESPN's win predictor. Now, the oddball thing is that Vegas actually has LSU favored by 2.5. But according to the matchup predictor has Ole Miss at a 56.5% chance to win this game. I don't want to get into the prediction aspect of it, but what I do see when I see something like this is Vegas knows what they're talking about. So if they're going to favor a team, they're typically going to favor a team for a said reason. LSU is at home, so this is they're on the road, but they're still favored. So if this was a neutral site game, basically what Vegas is saying is LSU would be a bigger favorite in a neutral site game.
Probably 5.5 points on a neutral site.
Right.
If it were in Baton Rouge, it would probably be LSU minus 7.5, somewhere in there.
Yes, that's exactly how the numbers tend to fall out. About a 3-point difference for a neutral site, and roughly about 4 or 5 maybe or so somewhere in there for home. But just looking at that difference in LSU being favored still on the road and Ole Miss being the matchup predictor win, how do you see that dynamic playing out? What do you think is to play there?
Yeah, it's a weird line. I've watched a lot of LSU. I've watched obviously all of Ole Miss, and I would have guessed that the line was going to start out more LSU -5, LSU -5.5, and when it popped at 2.5, I was like, well, I don't. It felt like a rat line to me. Kind of, hey, most people are going to think like I do, so jump on LSU, lay the points, and Vegas is going to make a bunch of money on the other side. But that's not really how Vegas works. They're trying to get an even amount of money on both sides of the line. And what's interesting about the betting line, the best I can tell this week, and I've read a little bit about it as we tape this on late Wednesday, and so a lot of the late money hasn't come in yet.
Right.
But 80% of the money has come in on the LSU side of the line. And yet the line has basically stayed at 2.5. It hasn't really moved. So I don't know. I don't know what I make of that. From a matchup standpoint, everything that I've seen screams LSU wins the game, 7 to 10 points. I'm having a hard time coming up with the scenario from just watching the football where Ole Miss really wins the game. And yet then I remember that this is a beat writer thing. When you're a beat writer and you cover the same team week after week after week after week after week after week after week, you see the flaws. And when you just watch another team somewhat casually, you have a tendency, if you're objective, and I try to be, if you're objective and you watch, you have a tendency to see the positives. You walk away with, boy, Daniels looks better this year. He looks more comfortable. And I talked to Jaden in Nashville at SEC Media Days, and he said as much, that he felt more comfortable this year, another year in the SEC, that kind of thing. I look at Malik Neighbors and I think, I don't know how Ole Miss guards him. I don't know how they contain him. And then the other receivers, very good. The tight end looks like he's getting healthier. They look solid, but not spectacular up front. I look at their defense, and frankly, I'm befuddled, right? I look at their defense, and it's just like dudes on the front.
Up and down the lineup.
And you're just like, how are they getting lit up like this? And then you watch their secondary, and you're like, well, maybe that's why they're trying to figure it out. And I know they were counting on Greg Brooks playing a big role, and then Greg unfortunately has a medical issue. Hopefully, all's well with him, but he's not playing. And you see all that, and you're like, well, maybe I'm just looking at this through the wrong lens. But look, I've been to Vegas multiple times, and the one thing that you always know when you go to Vegas is all those buildings, they weren't put on credit; they were paid for. So Vegas knows what it's doing, and if I were betting real money, I mean, I will probably make predictions and whatnot. If I were betting real money, I don't know that I'd touch this game. That the line feels fishy.
Yeah, I'm really waiting for AJ Hoffman, our Vegas insider, to pin his article and basically tell me where to put my money on this game. Because I'm just like you, I'm feeling a little odd about it, because I'm wondering, why the line came in at 2.5 and they're on the road, just like you said. And another thing is you laid it out perfectly. How do they defend Malik Neighbors? How is this defense like this? Well, I see the defense, and the reason why I'm looking at a reason why this line may be where it is because I guess Vegas thinks that Ole Miss's offensive line is going to hold up in order to give the quarterback time to get the ball down the field to take advantage of some of those deficiencies that LSU has in its back seven. So,
and it could be also that people watch what mobile quarterbacks have done against the LSU defense, and you saw it last week with KJ Jefferson quite frequently in that game. He was able to do what I think he does best, which is get away from pressure and extend his plays with his feet. He's such a big guy, so strong. He's also really athletic, and he's got a big arm. And as plays lengthen, in other words, as he has more time and he's moving around, and I think Arkansas's receiving core is a little bit better than it gets credit for. And so he was able to find some guys, found the tight end a lot on some broken plays. They started getting rolling, and like any offense, you saw this with LSU's offense, especially in the second half against Arkansas. Once an offense gets moving and they get confident and they get rolling, it's hard to stop them, And in the second half of that game, neither side could stop the other. It really kind of came down to who's going to get the ball last. And, maybe they see that. Maybe they see, hey, Jackson Dart's a pretty mobile quarterback. Jackson's pretty athletic. He's been known to extend plays with his feet. He's a willing and able runner. And maybe they think this thing's going to turn into a shootout, and that keeps the number low.
Yeah, I could definitely see that happening because not only is he, of course, the leading passer, because he's the only one that's pretty much thrown the ball. Spencer Sanders and Walker Howard have thrown a few passes, but he's also Ole Miss's leading rusher, which leads me into one of my questions I like to ask everybody every week. Outside of the obvious, which the obvious in this case is Jackson Dart, like we just talked about, who is a guy on that Ole Miss offense that this LSU defense needs to worry about every time he lines up?
Well, I mean, I'm sure LSU has spent the week focusing on the running game and focusing on Quinshon Judkins and making sure that, hey, the breakout game doesn't happen against us. I mean, that's the way that you slow this offense down, it's the myth about Lane Kiffin offenses, right? That they're these pass happy air raid kind of offenses. I think because they love tempo, people think that means they love to throw it, and that offense is built on the running game. And so if you take away Judkins, and for the most part people have this year, if you take away Judkins and you get them behind the chains, well, then you get to make that offense more predictable, and you get to tee off on an offensive line that's had a hard time protecting. And so I'm sure LSU's goal is to do that one very thing, not let Ole Miss get the running game going, because the running game with tempo is difficult to stop. They start getting 6, 7, 8 yards a chunk, and you set up a bunch of 2nd and 2, 2nd and 3s where you can afford to take a big shot. And they didn't do that against Alabama. Alabama did a really good job against the Ole Miss running game, with the exception of one drive, and kept Ole Miss kind of behind the chains, having to try to find ways to get chunk yards on third down. I think Ole Miss was 3 for 14 on third down. I don't have the exact number in front of me, but it was something like that. And if you're Alabama, that was a recipe for success. That's how they stopped them. And I'm sure LSU is going to try to emulate a lot of what Alabama did last week in Tuscaloosa.
Yeah, and one of the things that, like you said, speaking to Lane Kiffin's, people thinking that it's a pass-happy offense because of the tempo, if they look back at his reclamation project at Alabama as their OC, one of the things that he relied heavily on was the run game. He relied on that stable of running backs and that stud offensive line, and they would play with tempo.
He gave the ball to Derrick Henry more than 300 times in a season. I mean, what Lane does, and this is where I think this offense is kind of searching for its identity right now. What he always does, if you go back through the years, is if he has a playmaker or two playmakers, his offense is really designed to just be malleable and get changed to go to the strengths of the players that are there. Like when he was at Alabama, 1 year it was Amari Cooper. 1 year it was Derrick Henry. He won with different kinds of quarterbacks there. Probably the best quarterback that he really worked with was Jake Coker. And then he comes to Ole Miss and he inherits Matt Corral. And they really did a great job of utilizing Matt Corral. And first year they really utilized Elijah Moore. I mean, he caught 90-something balls in 8-9 games in that COVID year in 2020. And then, last season, he had Jackson Dart, but they weren't as efficient passing the ball, and they really leaned on the run. They had Quinshawn and they had Zach Evans, and they ran the ball with Dart some. They were a really effective running team most of the season. And now this year there is no Zach Evans. They haven't established that second running threat, and people are keying on Quinshawn Judkins. They've taken him away for the most part, like I just said, and they've had some injuries in their wide receiver core, and they're just now getting some guys back. Caden Prescorn's back, tight end, played for the first time against Alabama. He looked really rusty. Zachary Franklin played for the first time. He's a transfer from TSA. He played a lot. Looked kind of rusty. He looked okay. They're still waiting on Trey Harris. I don't know what his status is. Land does not talk injuries. The Louisiana Tech transfer had 5 touchdowns in the first game and a quarter before he's got hurt against Tulane, and he really hasn't played. He played a handful of snaps in Tuscaloosa, but he was ineffective. I don't know what his status is for this week. So they're trying to get guys back. They're trying to get to full strength, and I still think they're just trying to kind of find themselves. And I don't think they've established what this offense's identity is going to be, and we're getting to a point in the season where it's kind of panicky if you don't establish that soon, because a second loss, like if Ole Miss loses to LSU, they're not going to Atlanta at that point. It's over. You're not getting there. They still got to go to Georgia. They still have to play Texas A&M. They still have to play Arkansas. I mean, the point is even if you said, hey, we're going to run the table except losing at Georgia. Okay, well, 3 SEC losses, and one's to LSU and one's to Alabama. You're not getting to Atlanta. LSU's not losing 4 SEC games. Alabama's not losing 4 SEC games. So it's over. And so this is their season. It's a fascinating storyline for Ole Miss because, and I know I'm jumping around a little bit, but this is the fascinating thing for them. A win, and they wake up on Sunday and they've got Arkansas at home next week, and then they get an open date, then they go to Auburn, and then they get Vanderbilt. They have some time to figure some things out, right? Mm-hmm. assuming they can beat Arkansas at home in this scenario, assuming they beat LSU and assuming they beat Arkansas, they've kind of got some time to get well, to figure things out, to get guys healthy, to establish an identity and make a late season run. But if they lose to LSU, none of that matters. You're not going – yeah, you can still have a nice season, but you're not getting to Atlanta. You're not winning the SEC. You're not going to a college football playoff. And those are the things that people can laugh. And I'm sure there's some LSU people that are laughing like, I can't believe it. Well, look, that's what they talk about. Lane Kiffin has never wavered from that. He's like, his goals at Ole Miss are to win big. So it means if he's telling that to the fans, he's saying that in his locker room. You've got a locker room full of transfer guys, lots of transfer portal guys. Half of the guys on this roster this year didn't play in the game in Baton Rouge last year. I mean, the carryover from one year to the next is it's really non-existent. And so this is a critical moment. Because if they were to lose to LSU, I don't care if it's by 1 point or by 20 points or by anything in between. If they lose to LSU on Sunday when he meets with his team to start turning the page to Arkansas, he's also got to come up with a completely different new motivation that is completely different than what they've used since day one of fifth quarter workouts in January, where it's all about, hey, this is going to be the team that finally gets to Atlanta. This is going to be the team that competes for a championship. This is going to be a team that is nationally renowned. This is going to be a team that has national goals, conference goals. If those goals are out the window, who knows what happens the rest of the way. I think this is the biggest game Lane Kiffin's coached at Ole Miss.
And I do not fault you at all for going off on that tangent and laying it out there like that, because that's exactly the way this season has laid out for them. And when I saw that they were playing Alabama and then LSU in back-to-back weeks, that immediately stuck out to me on their schedule, because I looked at the rest of the schedule in between. Next week's Arkansas game could be a bit of a challenge, but they're not very good this year. Auburn's not very scary this year. Vanderbilt is never scary. A&M has fallen way off the map, and now their quarterback is out.
Yeah.
Georgia is their last big test down the stretch after this LSU game. And then you have Mississippi State, who they should beat in the Egg Bowl, I think. And so you didn't understate the importance of this game at all. I agree with you wholeheartedly.
It's vital. And so, if you have your locker room intact and you're still playing for something, because look, if you beat LSU, right, you can say, well, we still have work to do, obviously, but you can hope that Alabama loses twice. You can hope that LSU beats Alabama. Maybe LSU beats Alabama and A&M beats Alabama. Boom, you're there, right? That includes you beating Georgia. And there's a lot. We're getting way ahead of ourselves, but you get right. In terms of the message that, see, there's two different things. We just touched on it. There's what the fans think, and that conversation where the fans are like, Ole Miss isn't beating Georgia, right? That's what fans say. And look, for the record, I agree. But in a locker room, he's not saying that. He's not saying, hey, guys, other than the trip to Athens, which is a loss, we got this.
Right.
That's not what he says. So in terms of keeping your team motivated and dialed in, you can honestly look at a group on Sunday or Monday when they get together after beating LSU in this scenario and go, we're in this. We got an opportunity to get away from us in Tuscaloosa, but we're back in this. We're going to have some help. But, guys, we can get there. You lose to LSU, you're going to you have to come up with something totally different on a team full of transfers who aren't necessarily ingrained into it. They didn't come to Ole Miss because they grew up Ole Miss fans. They didn't come to Ole Miss because it was the school that offered them first, and 4 years later they loved the place. That there's a little of that on the roster, but very little. You got to motivate a bunch of outside people who it's going to be natural for them to go, well, this didn't go the way I thought it was going to go. I need to take care of me now. And it gets fragmented.
Yeah, and then the thing is, when you're coming in and you're establishing a new culture like that, and you're bringing in a ton of transfers, you want to make sure you're bringing in guys that can say, hey, this is the way I want us to establish our mentality. These are the identities that I want to have on these sides of the ball. This is what I want to try to accomplish with this. I want to win, and I want to win big. I want to win the division. I want to win the SEC. I want to compete for, national titles and whatnot.
Yeah.
When that goal for the season has been dinged a little bit, then you still have to find another carrot to dangle out there in front of these guys, because you still want to establish that winning tradition, that mentality. Like, hey, we're not just here to be bowl eligible anymore like we used to think. We're here to compete for division titles, for conference titles, for national titles. And I love when a coach can come into a program and adjust the culture to a winning aspect, and just adjust the way everyone thinks and the way everyone talks. And to see what Lane Kiffin has done there at Ole Miss, not only to get his team to start to buy in and believe a little bit, but to get the fans and excited about the prospects of winning, it's unbelievable. And I really love when I see a coach can totally come in and not just change the culture of his team, but also change the culture of the fan base.
Yeah, but that's why this is a big game too, because if you go back, Ole Miss was 8-1 last year, and they lost out. They lost, they were 7-0 actually when they went to Baton Rouge. If you want to start going there, they were 7-0 when they went to LSU, and they got really blown out in the second half of that game in Tiger Stadium. And then they beat Texas A&M. They lose to Alabama. They lose to Arkansas. They lose to Mississippi State. They lost the bowl game to Texas Tech, and now they just lost to Alabama. So if they were to lose to LSU on Saturday, they're like 1-6 in their last 7 SEC games. And so fans start asking questions like, well, maybe this isn't working. Maybe this is sliding backwards. Maybe he's not building this thing the right way. It's a big moment for them. I thought the Alabama game was a huge game because I thought it was going to, and it was. I thought it was going to sort of set the stage for Ole Miss's standpoint. It's either going to make this weekend a big opportunity or kind of a make or break. And I think that's where we are. I think because they lost, this is kind of make or break. I mean, you can still have a good year. You can still have a special year. You can still go 9-3, 10-2. But if the goal was to win a title, the title's gone if they lose to LSU on Saturday. It's not happening. And so you got to come up with something different. So that's why I think this is just a big moment. It's for LSU. It's a big moment, right? Because if they lose this game, it's 2 losses. I don't know even. I guess LSU could talk itself into, well, if we lose at Ole Miss and then run the table, and including that winning the SEC title, maybe an 11-2 LSU gets into the playoff. But the way that the college football landscape is playing out this year, probably not.
You don't know, because there's so many teams out there that could potentially end up winning their conference with 1 loss, maybe even 2 losses.
Absolutely.
There's so many teams out there that Georgia doesn't even look as dominant as number 1 right now.
Yeah, there's multiple Pac-12 teams that look like a 1-loss champion would put them in the playoff. You got that Michigan, Ohio State thing, Penn State even. One of those teams as a 1-loss champion would get in over a 2-loss SEC champion. You've got the couple of interesting teams in the ACC. You guys already saw one of them in Florida State. So no, I think it's a big game for both teams in terms of that. If this were a 12-team playoff year, we wouldn't be having this conversation in September.
Not at all.
But the fact that it's a 4-team playoff year, we're having it, and it's valid. And it's one of the reasons I love the 12-team. It's going to make it a lot more fun because seasons can't die in September.
Right. And I think that people are overplaying their hand when they say that, it's adding to the season and it could take away from the student athlete. No, BS. Because let's just call it what it is. Everybody thought going from 11 to 12 games was going to be the end of the world. Everybody thought, adding a playoff would be the end of the world. We see that it's not. Adding 1 or 2 more games maybe to the college football season is not going to kill anyone. It's not going to hurt revenue. It's not going to hurt anything else. But looking at this game as well, one of the other things I like to ask is when LSU has the ball and Jaden Daniels is, under center or in the shotgun, who's the guy or 2 guys on Ole Miss's defense that, hey, he needs to be like, hey, there's so-and-so, point him out?
So last week at Tuscaloosa, Ole Miss really utilized kind of a spy on Jalen Milroe. And the one that was probably the most effective was the true freshman, Suntarin Perkins, number 4. Terrific young player, has a really, really bright future in the SEC. Very athletic, has a real sense for the ball. One of those guys that's a natural linebacker, can make plays sideline to sideline, can close in on a quarterback and make a sack. He's been really effective. They've been increasing his role week after week after week. He's a guy that I would assume that LSU's really expecting to play a pretty big role on Saturday. The rest of the Ole Miss defense, probably the one other guy that because of LSU's passing game, and because of how dynamic Malik Neighbors can be, the other guy to probably watch is I'm losing my mind here. Isn't that crazy? DeAndre Prince, number 7. He's probably a guy that if Ole Miss gambles at all with 101 on Neighbors, he's an NFL talent at corner. He's probably the one guy that they would put on him and go, we'll try it here and there. I think it's real risky to go one-on-one on Neighbors because he's just explosive. But he's probably one to watch. They've got some good defensive linemen. J.J. Pegues, interior defensive lineman, has had a pretty good season so far. Isaac Ukwu, transfer from James Madison, has begun to emerge as a pretty steady contributor on this defense. Their linebacker play outside of Perkins has not been anything to write home about. Their play on the back end has been okay. It's got to get better. It's Pete Golding came in, the former Alabama defensive coordinator. He came in and basically got rid of most everyone. They added more than 20 defensive transfers out of the portal in 1 year, which tells you that he looked at what he had and said, this won't work. So, but they're recruiting a lot of high school kids. They're very clear that Golding is trying to change the way that they build that defense, but he's got what he's got this year, and they've been okay. I mean, they've had some moments where they struggled. We don't really know because Tulane was without Michael Pratt that day that Ole Miss won. Georgia Tech rolled up almost 500 yards of offense and left some points on the board. And then, they held their own against Alabama, but Milroe still had a pretty good day, and Alabama was able to, second half score, 18 points in the second half to put that game away. So the jury's still out on that defense, but the one that you'll probably watch, the guy that I think LSU will keep an eye on is Perkins.
Yeah, he's one of those that new age, almost like a hybrid safety type of linebacker. Similar. I mean, a little bit different build than Harold Perkins Jr. for LSU because he's about 6'1", about 220, and Centurion Perkins is about 6'3", about 205 is what they have him listed as.
Yeah.
And you look at those two guys and you're like, they look like they should be like box safeties maybe, or like Perkins looks like a linky corner or something like that. But they're playing linebacker. And the reason why is I love when you have a guy that with that sideline to sideline speed can track down runners, can maybe cover a receiver in an open space and not look like he's got two left feet while he's doing it. So I love watching those type of guys play. So I'll have to keep an eye on number 4 for sure when LSU has the ball. One other thing that I like to look at, just is what I call get off the bus guys. These are the guys where they may not even be the most talented players on your roster, but when you look at their physical specs, you're like, holy crap. Like, look at this. One guy, long, lanky defensive end, freshman Chamberlain Campbell, 6'7", 215.
He hasn't played yet.
I looked at offensive lineman Micah Pettis, 6'7", 360. And another guy was a really huge guy, one of the defensive tackles. Yeah. Xavier Harris, 6'7", 335.
Yeah.
And Joshua Harris, 6'4", 325. Not related, it looks like. But it just when I see guys like that on a roster, I'm like, what is it about these guys? Because they're physically imposing. But is there any of these guys that may play that? Because I love when you have a guy who looks like an Adonis or like a guy who looks like a refrigerator with limbs get off a bus because it's intimidating.
Yeah, Xavier Harris has really begun to play more and more and has a huge frame, a lot of athleticism. It's kind of raw. I think for the longest time people thought he would end up moving over to the offensive side. He's not. He's going to stay on defense, and he's beginning to kind of grow. His skill set's beginning to grow into his body. You mentioned Pettis. Pettis is Ole Miss's starting right tackle. He started as a true freshman. He's starting as a sophomore. He's a guy that the key for his game, and I don't know whether he can do it or not, he's got to control his emotions. Mm-hmm. He also has a tendency to fall in love with the pancake, to fall in love with the physical dominance part of the game. and get away from the technique part of the game. And he'll play too high. He'll grab. He'll throw a guy to the ground. And he's so strong that when he uses his hands improperly, the refs see it because he stops guys. He's so big. He's gotten some critical holding calls. He's got to cut that out. He's the part. I assume you're probably going to ask me, what's the one matchup you're really focused on? It's this.
Yeah, that was like my next question.
It's Ole Miss's offensive line against LSU's defensive front. Simple as that. I think the game is either going to be won or lost right there. The rest of it, Daniels is going to get his. Neighbors is going to get his. They're going to run the ball. LSU is going to score points. Period. They're going to score points. They can score points in bunches. They've proven that. They're going to do it again on Saturday. LSU's at a minimum going to get up into the upper 20s. So the question will be, can Ole Miss's offensive front neutralize LSU's defensive front enough to establish a running game and to take advantage of what to this point has been subpar LSU secondary? That's where the game's going to get decided. Because if the answer to that is yes, we're in for an interesting game. If the answer to that is no, Ole Miss can't hold up front against LSU's defensive front, this game's over. And Ole Miss isn't going to win it. I mean, it's really that simple.
Yeah, that was actually, I had the flip-flop for my matchup. It's LSU's defensive front against Ole Miss's line, because one reason why I chose that particular matchup instead of the one you chose is because Vegas has the over and under right now set at 67.5. Yep. With a 2.5 point spread and the over and under at 67.5, that means they think both teams are going to score a ton of points here. So my thing is if Ole Miss is going to score a ton of points, that means Jackson Dart is going to be running crazy, throwing the ball all over, and probably being Ole Miss's leading rusher, making plays similarly to the way KJ Jefferson did last week, like you spoke of earlier. So that was my primetime matchup. How this game is going to be decided is if LSU's defensive front can overpower Ole Miss's offensive line and cause them to have issues on the offensive end. So looking at the game, I mean, we pretty much laid it out there and almost said what we think. Last but not least, our predictions. What is your final prediction for this game?
I've kind of gone all over the place, but at the end of the day, I'm going to trust my eyes, and I just think LSU is going to outscore Ole Miss. I'm kind of going 31-24, 31-27, somewhere in there, 34-27. I like LSU by about a touchdown.
Yeah, I was thinking a little bit higher scoring of a game, probably LSU 41, Ole Miss 27, 28, something like that. Around almost a 2-touchdown win, but Ole Miss is going to give them enough issues to where they're going to put points on the board, I think, because like you said, LSU has a problem with slowing down those athletic quarterbacks. And we saw what KJ Jefferson was able to do last week. I think Jackson Dart is going to present a similar issue. He may not be as hard to bring down as KJ Jefferson because the guy's almost 250 pounds.
Yeah.
But I do think that this team is starting to round itself into shape. Mason Smith is starting to get his lungs in him. Wingo is playing out of his mind. Guys along that defensive front. I mean, we saw, last weekend, one of the articles that we had featured on Death Valley Insider was about Deshaun Womack and how he needs to get more playing time because of the way he performed last week. So when you look at this, I just think that Ole Miss has just enough, and especially with Jackson Dart pulling the trigger, to give this LSU defense enough fits to score 3, maybe 4 touchdowns in this game. Now how their defense holds LSU and how many mistakes LSU decides to make shooting itself in the foot like they tend to do sometimes, that's going to be on them. But I do think that this game will be a little bit higher scoring. I don't think that they'll get, that over 67.5. I think they'll come really close to it. And I think LSU wins by, I would say, roughly about 10 to 13 points.
Yeah, I mean, I can see that. And if that happens, boy, it's going to be a rough week around here next week because that would not go over with the masses particularly well. So that would be an interesting outcome.
But at the same time, if LSU doesn't cut out the stupid mistakes, the slow starts and things like that, because they've started slow this whole year. The only game that they weren't able to recover from a slow start was the Florida State game, is because they just played that way throughout the whole entire game. But you look at the Grambling game, they started slow. You look at the Arkansas game, they didn't really start quickly. You look at the game against Mississippi State, they didn't really start off quickly. So I expect for them to start off slow. It's just, is Ole Miss going to do enough in the beginning when LSU has that slow start in order to make the rest of the game interesting? That's where I think another critical juncture of this game is going to come in at, is how Ole Miss comes out, because LSU has seen they've started off really slow.
Yeah, could be. I can see that. LSU started slow last year against Ole Miss, and then the second half was a beatdown. So
it was, I believe, 20-17 at halftime, and the final score was 45-20. So right. I don't know how it got out of hand. I just remember, like, gosh, this is a really good game, a really tight game at halftime, and the next thing you know, it was over with.
They couldn't block Harold Perkins, and they could not handle Daniels. That's how it got out of hand. It's pretty simple. Daniels made plays, and LSU got rolling on offense, and they couldn't handle that defensive front. They couldn't handle Perkins. He was everywhere. He was very disruptive, and that's what. Look, those guys are back, so it's the same challenge. It's for Ole Miss. They get to have it in a more friendly environment, but it's the same challenge. You've got to handle LSU's athleticism up front, and you've got to contain Daniels. You can't let him get going. He's the equivalent of a baseball pitcher that once he starts rolling through innings, the longer he goes, the harder he is to hit, and that's where he is. And so they know it. They know what the challenge is. It's a matter of whether they have the ability to stop it. So we'll see.
Well, Neal, I really appreciate you joining me this week, man. It was great. I mean, I love having like somebody that I can just throw a question out there and just let them go. I love doing an interview like that. I hate it when I got to pull teeth and make people answer questions and elaborate and whatnot. Just to have somebody you can throw a question out there and just let them go, it's way easier on me as an interviewer.
Well, I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to do it. Appreciate you having me.
Yeah, man. So we'll catch up. Hopefully you guys have a good weekend. Take care. Talk to you next time.